Tom just mentioned in his prayer, we're going to start a new series today, and I plans to get through it in a quarter. My plan is to do that. We'll see how that goes. Halfway through, I'll know. if we're still in lesson 3 in late November, then obviously we're not going to make it, and that'll be all right too. But when we've got 2 classes, theoretically, we've got the gospel meeting in this mix, and so that's going to change that a little bit. But for most intents and purposes, we've got 2 class periods to kind of cover a lesson. So anyway, we'll see. I don't know. This material's new to me. I came across it a while back and looked at it and trying to decide whether it fit kind of what I was trying to do in this quarter. I felt like we needed to move away from the Old Testament for a little while and do something in New Testament study. And I thought a lot about Jeremiah, and I couldn't help in my mind to wonder a little bit of what kind of disciple Jeremiah would have been. I see him as a Stephen. You know, I see him as someone, if he had been in the days of Jesus, who would have been willing to die for the cause, who would have been willing to give himself as a disciple, as a follower, as a learner, as a pupil of the master teacher, Jesus. And that began then a process in my mind of thinking about who should we be as disciples and followers of Jesus. I think sometimes we use terminology without ever really considering what those things mean. We talk about being a disciple of Jesus, or we talk about being a Christian, or we talk about being a child of God, and we're real good at using the right terms. We're real good about identifying who we're supposed to be by the right labels. But sometimes I wonder whether we've ever given any long and consideration to what do those things actually mean. What does it mean to be a disciple? And what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? And so that's where this series of lessons is going to take us. There's where we're going to find our study over the next several weeks. If you need some lesson sheets, just raise your hand real quick. I brought some up here to the front, which would make it a little easier for me. And if you take one back. And I'm giving you, what you're getting is what we're covering today. You didn't react, Pat. That's a stack of stuff. No, that's the whole thing. That's the whole series. So there's more back there too on the table back there, kids. But anyway, if you grab the stack, you've got it all. Okay, if you grab the stack, you've got it all. Or if you got the digital version I sent out the other day, that's all of it as well. And so you can work through that material. General rule of thumb: study on Sunday, questions won't come till Wednesday. General rule of thumb. That may change on occasion, but for the most part, I don't see us getting through enough of the lesson to be able to get to the questions at the end until the second time we're in that. And so just a general rule of thumb you can be thinking about, although we're probably going to have to do things a couple of different ways with the gospel meeting coming up next week to help facilitate that. Go into Luke chapter 14. Let's start there. So Luke chapter 14. And let's talk a little bit about just the concept of being a disciple. The first lesson basically tries to define what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And the writer of this workbook mentions that Jesus is open and honest about the demands of discipleship and calls upon men to count the cost to make sure they are willing to meet these demands. And so let's look at Luke chapter 14 and let's examine this text together for a moment as to what Jesus asks from his disciples. And if I was just to ask you that, and generically speaking, would you say that his demands are high or low?
High.
High, right? He has high demands. He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You want to be a follower of Jesus, then you have to meet his expectations. I think sometimes what we want to do is we want to be a follower of Jesus based on our own expectations. We want to be a follower, a disciple of Jesus, but we want to get to define that. We want to get to say what it means to be a disciple, and we want to define the criteria by which someone is defined as a disciple. But we don't have that liberty. Jesus says, this is how my disciples are going to be defined. Verse 25, now there went with him great multitudes, And he turned and said unto them, If any man cometh unto me, and hateth not his own father, and mother, and wife, and children, and brethren, and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. If I was to ask you real quick, what's kind of the defining thought in that verse that helps us understand what he means by hate mother, hate father?
Forsake all.
Okay, to forsake all, including who? Maybe that's a better way to ask that.
Relatives.
Yeah, right here. And his own life also. Okay? So don't get caught up in the language and say, well, I don't want to be. Who would want to be a disciple of Jesus? He's telling me to hate my parents. You know, who would want to be a follower of one who challenges us to have to hate our father and mother, who then will later say, do what with father and mother? Honor and respect them, right? So it doesn't. So obviously that's not what he's saying. And when he throws "and his own life," me, my own life also, into that equation, it helps define it for us. Jesus has to be where? In terms of priority. Very first. Okay? Discipleship requires Jesus to be first and foremost above father, above mother, above self. Okay? And that's the key in this process that he begins. And if we refuse to do that, what's he say at the end of that verse?
Cannot be disciple.
He cannot be my disciple. It's choice. Jesus says, and remove reward and consequence away for a moment. In other words, remove the concept of heaven and hell out of the picture for a moment. Jesus is simply saying, choose. But you cannot put me secondary to anything and be my disciple. And so make a decision. Are you willing to accept that level of responsibility or not? And choose wisely how we react to that. Whosoever, verse 27, doth not bear his own cross and come after me cannot, there's that word again, cannot be my disciple. What's he talking about, to bear your own cross? Any idea what it means to bear your own cross?
Cross back then was something very, very distasteful, and people suffered on it. So if you're not willing to suffer, die for him, you cannot be a disciple.
Okay. And so there could be this sense of a willingness to accept whatever comes because of discipleship. If there's suffering, if there's challenge, if there's difficulty, you must be willing to accept those things along the path.
But you have to, before you accept the invitation, you're going to have to examine the cost, what you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
And whatever it entails, if you accept it, then you've got to bear the cross. You've got to do everything that you have thought in your life to do.
So I'm going to have to, if once evaluating and making the decision, then I'm going to have to be willing to accept whatever comes in that process. What else do you think? Go ahead.
Are people willing to, do they misrepresent this? Some people say, I want to be punished. I want to suffer bad things.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I don't know that Jesus, there doesn't seem to be any indication in the language that would imply that Jesus is telling you to go borrow suffering and to go invite it. He's saying, bear your own cross. Are there going to be personal battles along the way in your walk as a disciple?
Yeah.
Are there going to be things that you're going to have to say, despite these challenges, I still need to be a disciple of Jesus? Right? To me, what one of the things Jesus is trying to get across here is don't come to me, and we'll see some texts before we're done with this whole study that deal with this concept, but don't come to me and then once you're here go, well, but I've got X, Y, Z, Q, and W to deal with. I can't focus on you right now, Jesus, because I've got these 10 things. You've got to bring whatever you've got, bring your own cross, and still be a disciple. Bear whatever you've got to bear, but you still have to be the disciple and follower that I desire you to be. You cannot excuse poor discipleship because I've got these handful of things going on in my life. It's a challenge that we have to overcome because he says we can't. If we don't want willing to bear our cross while we walk this path of discipleship, we can't. And that'll have some symbolic nature eventually in relationship to Jesus as he bore his own cross as he walked to Calvary. And sometimes you have to bear all the burden of discipleship on your shoulders. For which of you, verse 28, desiring to build a tower, doth not first sit down and count the cost, whether he have wherewith to complete it? It's kind of what Bob was saying a little bit earlier. You've got to evaluate the cost of discipleship and make a choice as to whether or not you're willing to accept all things related to it. Lest haply when he hath laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all that behold begin to mock him.
Never said it'd be easy.
Yeah. And the world tends to turn on a fallen disciple. When he says, else the world will, you get the tower halfway built and you run out of money and the world will mock him. But you think about every religious figure, that's the best way I can describe it, though it's not exactly parallel, you understand what I'm trying to say. But think about every religious figure that has had a fallout of some kind, and it becomes a lightning rod for the world to criticize whom? Christ. And it becomes a lightning rod for them to criticize everyone who is a follower of Christ. Even though, in many senses, a lot of these folks that have fallen from grace had issues to begin with their relationship with Jesus in terms of false teachings and things that they promote. But from a generic standpoint, when we fall, we can become a lightning rod. He warns us about that. You count the cost. It's going to be painful to walk away from this after deciding to follow Jesus. For what king, verse 31, as he goeth to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and take counsel whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an embassage and asketh conditions of peace. So therefore, whosoever he be of you that renounceth not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. The author of the workbook, I'm trying to remember exactly, I believe it's a portion of this introductory paragraphs, but my brain's not clicking quite right for the moment. But he makes the statement, you have to be careful with the pictures and analogies that are made. Because, here's why. Somebody can come to this text and say, well, before you go to war, you got to count the costs. And if you don't have enough to pay, you don't have enough men and power and ability to win, then you go and try to do what? You try to make peace. You try to negotiate, right? Let's try to negotiate. And so some might come to that text and say, well, okay, if I don't want the fullness of what Jesus is asking of me, I'm going to have to go negotiate. I'm going to have to try to go make peace in some other way. That's not the picture. The picture is you don't accept the responsibility of going to battle if you're not ready and you don't have the resources and you don't have the commitment necessary. And so that's the warning the author of the workbook reminds us of. Be careful with the pictures. Because sometimes we can make more of the story that's being used or the parable that's being used than Jesus intended. The bottom line is found in verse 33, right? So therefore, whosoever he be of you that renounceth not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. If anything is above Jesus, if there's anything that you have, or that you're connected to, or that I'm connected to, that I would say that's off limits. If that's off limits to Jesus, then I can't be his disciple. There's nothing off limits. You can't hold anything back in that sense. Nothing can be considered a priority over Jesus? Nothing. Family, wealth, anything. And that's the point he's driving at. Discipleship has a heavy price. But things with a heavy price sometimes come with what? A heavy or great reward, right? And that's the point. What you have to remind ourselves of in this whole process is, yeah, there's a great price. And some people say, that's an awful large burden to bear to try to be a Christian, sure. But consider the payoff. Consider the reward of accepting that challenge. Consider the benefit that it brings to us if we're willing to accept the challenge of discipleship.
The example was good with that rich man lawyer or ruler came to him.
Yeah.
He went away sorrowful because riches overcame him.
And he went away sorrowful too because, remember, Jesus asked him a series of questions. Have you obeyed the law, basically? And he says, yes, from my youth. Yes, yes, yes. He was checking off the list. But he had one thing that he was unwilling to say, that's not on the table. That's off limits. And he went away sorrowful because of it. Jesus says, you got it. Everything's on the table. Everything's on the table. If you're going to be my disciple, bring it all, because it's all out. And all of it has to be willing at any point to be let loose in order to continue to be my follower.
Do you think that verse refers to the fact that you have to give away everything before you start? Or if push comes to shove, then you have to give it away if it conflicts with your bearing your cross for Christ?
Yeah. I believe what he's trying to simply say is that everything, you have to be willing to sacrifice at any moment. Because if my father is the kind of father he should be, and he's faithful to the Lord, most likely I'm not going to have to hate him, right? I'm not going to have to disregard him at some point. If my mother's faithful and they're doing what I won't. But if they refuse to honor God, if they lead me, or they become a distraction to me from serving the Lord, then I might have to disregard. So it's a matter of attitude and disposition that everything's available to Jesus. I'll sacrifice any of it if I have to.
You got to bear in mind,
whatever
what you
it
have
takes.
is what Christ has given you, what God has given you. So you're not giving away what's yours. You're giving back what's His. Right.
You whatever you're using, if He calls for us to use it for His purposes, it was His anyway.
Right.
And that helps, by the way, in processing that. If we quit thinking mine, but it's all just from Him, and whatever it takes to do this. And just a quick thought, Bob, in that respect, early disciples, Ananias and Sapphira, if you recall, there were folks who were doing exactly this. They were sacrificing their own personal wealth in order to help those that were there in Jerusalem. And if you recall, Peter said, while it was yours, you could do with it as you please. There was no law, if you will, no guideline that was demanding that these disciples give up those things. And so I'm simply illustrating that there doesn't seem to be any indication that out front, and that was your first question, that at the very beginning of this process you got to give it all up. It's a mindset of anything that I need to sacrifice for the cause of being a disciple of Jesus, whatever it takes. That's what I'll do.
Love has got a lot to do with it too.
Yeah. Love for the Lord first will lead us to a lot of better things otherwise. Okay, jump to lesson 1. Let's jump in this. We've got kind of a mindset now of what discipleship, at least introductory-wise, is. So let's look at the lesson itself. Together this morning. What is discipleship? The same thought in Luke chapter 9, verse 23 is kind of what we already saw in Luke chapter 14 as well. Then he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, that's what we've been talking about, and take up his cross daily. We spoke to that. And then what? Follow. You ever lost somebody? I mean, you know, so you're somebody's supposed to be following you, and you know, nothing more. Well, maybe I'm overstating it here a little bit, but it's not always the most enjoyable travel when you're traveling in a pack, and the guy in the front's always worried about the guy where. Always worried about the guy. It's hard sometimes to follow and keep track, and so when it comes to following, it's the closer you are in proximity, the easier it is to follow, right? You ever been following somebody, you don't know where you're going, and a traffic light comes in between you and them? And it's like the world just, you might as well just a great big sinkhole open it up and drop you in it because you feel like, you know, it's hard to follow from a distance. You lose sight of that which is out in front of you. It's hard. A lot of times our failures as discipleship comes because we're trying to follow Jesus from a distance. We don't want to be so overly connected that people think of us as a fanatic or something of that sort. We don't want to appear to be radical. We don't want to appear to folks as being somehow out of the norm. And so we try to be followers of Jesus from a distance. But that's not effective in any relationship that requires somebody to follow. Jesus says, follow me. Be connected to me. Let me direct your path, your choices, your steps that you take. The Greek word that used here simply means a learner or a pupil. A learner or a pupil. Our English words don't grasp as well in some ways as they should the concept here. Because, and here's why. Generally, we think of a teacher as someone who educates me in a certain piece of information, and then I do what? Right, I go off on my own now, right? I learned something. I didn't hear what you said, David, probably. But you learn something and you go home, right? You leave. You don't stay connected. And so it's not that kind of teacher-pupil relationship. The relationship is that Jesus is the master teacher. It's a deeper connection than just the idea of our concept of a teacher who educates for a period of time and then we go off on our own. We continually stay connected to the teacher. And it's a devotion that begins to build a deep-rooted connection that I would not want to relinquish or distance myself from. It's too valuable to me. And so I begin to not just learn, but I begin to adopt His way of life. I begin to adopt the mindset, the character that Jesus has. I begin to adopt His love and compassion for others. I continually stay connected to the one who is teaching and educating me concerning the things of this life. And though He had several followers, many followers, He made it pretty clear that not everyone who happened to have a physical connection to Him was a genuine disciple. Back to Luke 14, verse 33. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. You go to John 8 and verse 31, and you add that text. Jesus therefore was saying to those Jews who had believed Him, if you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. Great thought, by the way, in that text. Is it possible to be a believer and not be a disciple? Yes. Okay, that's a key concept that I think we've got to kind of get into our minds. It is possible to be a believer in Jesus and not be a disciple of Jesus. Those two things aren't necessarily immediately connected. Now, I recognize that sometimes we use the word believer in different tones. And so there were those who witnessed Jesus. And they saw the miracles, and they believed what? That actually happened, right? They saw people that they knew had been lame, and they saw them walk. They saw people who were fed with little to begin with. They witnessed things that helped them draw conclusions about who Jesus was and a general belief in who Jesus was. But he said, who is it really that are the disciples? Those who do what? In John 8:31. Abide in my word. Those who abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. Belief is the stepping stone. Belief is the catalyst. Would I even consider being a disciple of Jesus if I didn't believe it was true? No, right? So I'd never even get to I wouldn't even be considering discipleship. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at how men throughout history have been able to make disciples out of people through deceit and lies and outright treachery at times. People tend to become followers and disciples sometimes. And there's no rhyme or reason, it seems like. You remember Jim Jones, and if you're old enough to remember, most people in this room, some of you are younger, not very many of you. But you remember Jim Jones, right? And we even coined a phrase from Jim Jones, didn't we? We use a cliche. We say, don't do what? Don't drink the Kool-Aid. We say that. We use that phrase because what they do, they lined up and drank the Kool-Aid. Mass destruction. Because people were following a man. Discipleship isn't always guided by the right frame of mind. You don't want to just be a disciple of anything, is my point. You don't want to just become a follower, a learner, a pupil, one who begins to adopt the lifestyle of another. Be careful who you choose to be a disciple of. I've seen people make tremendous sacrifices, even their own lives, over discipleship to the wrong cause in people. Jesus says, abide in my word, be dedicated unto me, but he has earned the right to call us to that. By the things that he's taught, by the provisions he has given, by the evidences of who he is, by all the things that are offered through Jesus, he has a compelling right to call us to be his disciple. And so when we choose to be a disciple of Jesus, when we choose to be a follower of his, when we choose to abide in his word, there's ample reason for that. But too many get caught up in all the wrong things and refuse to look through. If there was no honesty in Jesus, if there was deceit in Jesus, if there were lies in his testimony, then there wouldn't be any reason to be his disciple. But when you examine the evidence and you study the Scriptures and you begin to abide in his word, we begin to recognize the legitimacy of why we should be his disciple.
Or even in Jesus' time, when they did see all these miracles, some of them still wouldn't even believe it.
Yeah. Even though they had all the necessary
And right in
information.
front of them.
Yeah. All right, so let's think about these criteria then. Here are some of the things that help us know. And sometimes it's good to know, am I a disciple or not? Am I living up to this or not? So point one is, we've got to deny self. Gets back to that whole concept. Who does not hate father or mother or oneself as well? Self-denial is an important quality to have. There are times we must deny ourselves things in order to achieve certain goals or to avoid certain problems. But I thought the author of the workbook made an interesting point here. It says, however, Jesus did not tell us that we must practice self-denial. He said that we must deny self. And there's a difference between the two. Somebody tell me what the difference between the two is. I don't know whether you read this and thought about it, but it's made me pause and think about it.
I'll take a stab at it. Self-denial would be that you're going to fall into an extent that you're just going to deny everything in life and be as poor as possible just to follow him. That's self-denial.
Yeah.
But to deny self means put somebody else ahead of you. And that would first of all be God. And it could be your family ahead of you. But you're not centered upon yourself all the time.
Right. Could I make sacrifices for selfish reasons?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I could make sacrifices. Real quick, 1 Corinthians 13. Though I give all my goods to the poor, though I give my body to be burned, though I do all these things and hath not love, it profits me nothing. Okay? The point is, I can deny self. I could say, I'm not drinking another cup of coffee. I'm not, and we can just list it on down and why I took it. And here I go with the food again. My boys will have fun with that. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But you understand what I'm saying? We can sit here and list all the things that we're going to give up. But that could be motivated by, it can be motivated by the idea that I want others to see. I want somebody to see how much I've sacrificed and all the things I've given up. And that's about self. And so self-denial, simply the concept of denying oneself something, isn't exactly what denying self is. Within denying self, will there be some times where we have some self-denial as part of that? Yeah, sometimes we'll have to make sacrifices. But they're not, I don't know that I'd ever necessarily given much thought to whether those two things were different or not, but they are in that sense. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, God did not condemn riches. What he condemned was if you used them wrongly and didn't use it for the good of others when you had the opportunity. He did not condemn riches. So we don't have to give up every single thing we have. That is not what it's all about. It's how we use what we have.
Yeah. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Self-denial is a negative thing. Self-denial will bring us to consequence, whereas denying self is a positive thing that will bring us rewards.
Yeah. Self-denial tends to have more to do with things than it does with being. And I don't want to just give up things. I want to give up self for the cause of Christ. Good.
That's like, I guess when I look at it, kind of sum it up in this real high level, they kind of hit on it. Gary and Roger both did. Is there's kind of a negative connotation or a positive connotation when you look at it. But to sum it up, when I think of deny self, I think more of selflessness.
Yeah.
Like as you mentioned, you put somebody else ahead of you. It's not about you.
When I conduct myself continually, where I'm always putting self in the right priority, is what Jesus is pushing for in this text.
What do we say to these people who say, we're not allowed to have anything in this world?
It doesn't seem consistent. Yeah, it doesn't seem consistent with the examples we have in Scripture.
Yeah.
And again, it can lead to a false sense. And here's the challenge sometimes with this. We could run 1,000 miles down this road, but we'll only run a half a mile here. But what happens is we almost convince ourselves of a greater piety. I am a better disciple because I've made more sacrifices than you have. And we get into this mindset that it is, again, about denying myself certain things is making me a better disciple. Whereas self-denial is what strengthens me and makes me a better disciple. And that will include at times making sacrifices of personal property or things of value. But again, they're not equal. Notice Luke 9:23. And again, these are in your worksheets. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Luke 14, back into that text. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his mother, father, wife, children, brother, sister, yea, his own life, also he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. It is about denying one's self. As a pupil, as a learner, as a disciple of Jesus, I am adopting the concepts and the lifestyle and the characteristics of Jesus. And in that process, I empty myself and I bring more and more of the Savior into my being.
I thought what the author said, Brian, there to the left in bolder print was a good thing along this line.
Yeah. He makes the comment on the side, if I am going to be a true disciple of Christ, I must put Christ in the center of my life and on the throne of my heart. He's in charge. He's in charge. And it's not superficial. It's not a bumper sticker. Okay? It's not a bumper sticker. I mean, you know, we can, and I'm not, you can put a bumper sticker. I don't care what you put on your car. I don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say here. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to be careful that, again, it's not just what we say. It's not just what we claim. It's not just the things that we define, or not even define, but label ourselves as. Is Jesus really the center of my life? Does he really sit as king over my heart? Because that's where true discipleship will be found. It's not about hating our family. It's about saying Jesus is first. In Matthew 10 and verse 37, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. You parallel those two thoughts between Luke 14 and Matthew 10, it helps us see what Jesus is requiring from us. We've got to remove self to allow room for Jesus to come in, and there cannot be anyone or anything that becomes between us and our loyalty to Christ.
Family members can put a lot of pressure on it.
Yeah. They can be some of the most challenging sources at times to our faith. And it's unfortunate, but it's obvious to me that Jesus saw that. And I think that was particularly going to be challenging. Where did the gospel go first? To whom first?
Jews.
To the Jews. You talk about tough. You know, I come home and tell Dad, who stood in the mob and said, crucify him, crucify him, and I tell him I just became his disciple. You know, you think about that. You think about how family strains would have been among devout Jews who were not ready to relinquish that system and heritage to become followers of something else. And you have others in those families who were choosing Jesus rather than the mindset of the Jewish tradition. It had to have caused a lot of strain on a lot of families. And so Jesus warns them ahead about that. And again, if I'm not willing to deny self, and at times that means deny more positive earthly relationships. We've become so in tune with wanting positive earthly relationships that sometimes we're unwilling to relinquish those in order to stay connected to Jesus.
Can we say, Brian, then we should respect Christ is saying, love father and mother less than you love me.
Yeah. He used the word more. And so Jesus more, them less. They've got to be somewhere under in this process. Okay. Lord willing, then we'll come back Wednesday and we'll finish up the study, and then we'll quickly and review, go over the questions. And that's the way I'll probably do this. If you like a lot of questions, you'll enjoy this study. If you don't, deny self.